The year was 2016 when this story unfolded in Mozambique. From start to finish, it became a journey unlike any other. Local police provided little assistance, and the authorities back in Australia weren't much more supportive. Deception, cover-ups, and silence kept the truth hidden. Yet, as new evidence emerged, the mystery only deepened. This is Ellie Warren's case, and the answers are still unresolved. Ellie Rose Warren was born on June 24, 1996, in Melbourne, Australia, to Paul and Nicole Warren. Raised in the seaside suburb of Mullock, Ellie grew up in a family that loved adventure. They often traveled together, exploring both Australia and foreign countries. Those family journeys sparked Ellie's fascination with nature and wildlife. In 2012, at the age of 15, a trip to Africa left a profound mark on her. Her father would later say that the experience ignited a lifelong passion in her and made her determined to see more of the world. Back home, Ellie quickly began planning future travels. After finishing high school, she took on different jobs to fund her trips. Over the next few years, she journeyed solo to places like Central America and Blythe Island. Her ambition matched her curiosity. Intelligent and determined, she had already secured a place at James Cook University in Queensland to study marine biology. Her dream was to build a career that combined her love for animals with her passion for exploring the globe. But before beginning her studies, she wanted one final adventure, another trip to Africa. At age 20, she signed up for a 6-week volunteer placement in Mozambique with a research organization called Africa Underwater. Volunteers assisted marine biologists studying coral reefs off the coast. Tragically, Ellie's dream was cut short while she was living it. Before leaving, she confided in her father that she was uneasy about traveling to Mozambique, acknowledging the risks. Still, having visited other challenging destinations in the past, she felt the rewards outweighed the dangers. In September 2016, she left for Mozambique. Upon arrival, she stayed at Casaberry Lodge in Tofo, a vibrant tourist town where Africa Underwater was based. Known for its low crime and laid-back lifestyle, Tofo was considered a safe haven for expats. Ellie spent her days diving into the Indian Ocean, studying marine life, and soon formed a close bond with another volunteer named Jade. It seemed like everything Ellie had ever wished for. Jade would later recall her as energetic, compassionate, and devoted to her conservation work. Tofo didn't have a wild nightlife, but volunteers and locals often gathered casually for drinks and socializing. On the final night of her volunteer program, Ellie joined her peers for drinks at Casaberry. An argument broke out between Ellie and another person, and she was told she could no longer consume alcohol while at the camp. Ellie took this as a sign that her volunteer time there had come to an end, deciding to stay a few more days nearby before moving on. On November 8th, just days before returning to Australia to begin university, Ellie returned to Tofo to say goodbye to her friends. She planned to spend the night at a hotel, but first stopped by Casaberry at around 6:30 p.m. to see her companions, including Jade. Her belongings were still at the lodge, and although she couldn't drink, she didn't mind. The last known photo of Ellie shows her sitting on the Casaberry patio with a bottle of water, smiling as her friends sipped alcohol around her. As the evening progressed, the group decided to head to Victor's Bar, a popular spot near the local market. Before joining them there, Ellie checked into her hotel, dropped off her bags, showered, and changed clothes. Later, witnesses said she hadn't consumed much alcohol, just a single beer before the group moved on to the home of a local acquaintance. It was around an hour later when Ellie was last seen. Ellie wanted to go back to Victor's Bar, but her friends weren't ready to leave yet, so she went back by herself. Some expats told Ellie's friends that she had come back and was looking for them when they went back to Victor's Bar. Everyone was having a great time at Victor's Bar, so the friends got some beers and went to the beach to wait for Ellie. Soon after, around 11 p.m., she did just that. She turned the corner and said, "I was just looking for you guys." From what I could tell, Ellie was happy and having a good time. There was nothing strange about her, and she wasn't drunk. While her friends sat outside, She went back into the bar by herself to get another beer. They thought she would go in, get a beer, and then meet them back on the beach. She never did, though. After a while, there was still no sign of her. Around 11:30 a.m. on November 9th, the group chose to go back to where they were staying. The next morning, people in the town started to get up. One of these early starters was a fisherman from the area. Instead of going straight to the market, he went past a small toilet block near the edge of the market. He saw something pale against the brown sand that caught his eye. He started to walk slowly towards what was on the ground. He was shocked to see a young woman lying face down in the sand. When he realized how bad things were, he took a step back and called the police. Within seconds, the quiet morning was broken by the appearance of police. People in the area gathered to talk about what might have happened and who this woman was. Ellie Warren was the name of the girl. Ellie had no life. It was said that she was found on her back with her pants pulled down to her knees and her legs stretched out and partially open. She had a black shirt on and her nose and mouth were pressed against the ground. Her neck and mouth were cut and bruised. A probe started right away. A security guard named Rafael, who worked the night shift at Hotel Tofoa, was the last person who was said to have seen Ellie living. His memory took him back to seeing Ellie walking towards her dorm around 2 a.m. on November 9th. Ellie really doesn't do things like this. She would never go off by herself and stay out late without calling her friends. He said she was by herself and looked like she was very drunk. After a short time, he saw her coming back from the hostel and going back to the market area. When the Mozambique Criminal Investigation Police got to the scene of the crime, they blocked off the area and did a check. At the same time, the terrible news was shared with Ellie's family. This is where the case starts to get really strange. Not long after she died in November 2016, a police spokesperson said that her death was sudden and mysterious, and there were no obvious signs of violence or attack. After that, on November 9th, 2016, an autopsy was done in Mozambique. From this exam, it looked like Ellie had died of asphyxiation after breathing in sand. The report said it looked like she fell face first into the sand and breathed it in, which killed her. They noticed that there were no major signs of external trauma or attack, but they still didn't know what caused her to fall. Following this news, the Australian government sent a man named Blake Gray to Tofo to gather information and try to figure out what happened. Blake talked to a number of people in the area, including the fisherman who found Ellie's body. This man had actually taken a picture of the crime scene, but couldn't send it online. Blake could have taken a picture of himself, but instead, he took a picture of the picture. Blake also talked to Steve, a citizen who worked at the Pari Pari Divers. Steve was one of the first people to arrive at the spot where Ellie's body was found and was the first person to identify her. Steve told Blake that he didn't think this was a mistake. He told them that he thought Ellie had been killed. He then told Blake that it looked like someone had stuffed a lot of sand into Ellie's mouth and pressed it down. Ellie's body was taken to South Africa on November 16, 2016. This is where another autopsy was done. The results of this exam were the same as the last one. She had died of asphyxiation from breathing in sand. Nevertheless, Ellie had breathed in a substantial quantity of sand while she was still alive, and the sand was so packed down that it looked like concrete. This pointed to a deliberate act, since the force needed to push the sand into the esophagus wasn't consistent with breathing it in by mistake. A toxicology study was also done, and it showed that she did not have any illegal substances in her body. At this point, the evidence suggested that she had been brutally stuffed with sand. However, the exact way the sand got into her body was still a mystery, and the team could not say for sure if it was murder or not. Things are getting even more strange, annoying, and hard to understand now. N.L. Scruton, a federal police detective from Australia, went to Tofo to look at the crime scene and Ellie's body. This detective went to the toilet and market area and took pictures and a sample of the sand. He took a trip to South Africa the next day to look at Ellie's body. The police officer could see that the sand he had taken from the crime scene was not the same sand that Ellie had in her mouth. There was real proof that the sand that was put in her mouth and lungs came from somewhere else, which meant that something bad had happened. She was killed violently by putting sand in her lungs, and this happened in one place. She was then picked up and dumped in another. After Ellie's body was brought back to the United States on November 22, 2016, a third autopsy was done in Australia. Once more, sand was discovered in her airways, but the Australian autopsy report eventually decided that there wasn't enough proof to show that she had been murdered and that the cause of death remained unknown. There is a lot of evidence that Ellie was brutally killed, but no autopsy report was brave enough to say what it was. The Warren family was getting antsy during this time. It was thought that the cops in Mozambique and the Australian federal cops weren't doing enough. On November 25th, the fishermen sent a clear picture of the crime scene to the Japanese police in Australia. The picture clearly showed cuts, bruises, and ripped clothes on Ellie, which was more proof of a fight. But the Australian government didn't do anything, even though they had a bad reputation. They did nothing while waiting for the Mozambique report and did not give any help or action to the Mozambique authorities. At this point, the Warren family was left in the dark. They were never told about the strong proof that Ellie died violently. Now comes the really annoying part. The Mozambique police kept looking into Ellie's death for months after she died, but it wasn't until April 2017, 6 months after she died, that they sent the Australian government their first official police findings. Even though a toxicology report said that no chemicals were found in Ellie's body that would suggest she died from an overdose, this 2-page report said that she had died from one. The Australian government thought this was a mistake and asked that the report be sent out again. On April 20th, 4 days later, another police report came in saying that the death might have been caused by murder. This mistake made people very suspicious of the Mozambique officials. This first report was written to trick the Australian government, so why else would it have been made? They wrote this report without looking at the technical results of their autopsy or the photos they took at the scene of the crime. This made me wonder if they were trying to trick the Australian government and end the case quietly. The Warren family was right to be angry and wouldn't accept the inconsistencies, but that wasn't the end of their anger. The Australian Federal Police knew about both reports and got them, but they did nothing when they were told about the murder verdict. A formal request for the Australian government to help with the investigation is known as a mutual aid request. This call for help from both sides was never sent. It became clear to the Warren family that the Australian government was not taking Ellie's murder seriously. After all, if the case was now being looked at as a murder, why weren't the Australian police doing anything? My daughter Ellie's dad, Paul Warren, started to think that the police, like the police in Mozambique, wanted the case to go away into the background. But Paul wouldn't let that happen. He was determined to find the truth, so he started his own research. In August 2017, one of the Australian detectives went back to Mozambique to try to find proof. The agent asked for pictures of the crime scene, even though the Australian police already had a clear picture of what they needed from the fishermen who found her body. When the detective asked for these pictures, the Mozambique cops said they were on a broken cell phone. In answer, this detective gave them local currency to fix the broken phone and get the pictures back. However, these pictures were never really given over. Remember that bit. Paul, Ellie's dad, saw that the case had gone cold and chose to do something about it himself. In October 2018, he went back to Mozambique to retrace the last steps his daughter took. He put up signs all over Tofo, begging people there to come forward with any information they might have. Within 2 days, he was called by a man in the area who had a clear, high-quality picture of Ellie's body taken right after it was found. Ellie's shirt was torn from the shoulder all the way down to her right side, which was important information that had never been shared with the Warren family. It looked like there was going to be a fight. Paul also talked to 2 locals who had been near the crime scene soon after Ellie's body was found. What these 2 men told Paul made a lot of sense, but there were also some worrisome holes in what they said. They remembered seeing Ellie's body in a different place than the fishermen had seen it in the picture. They said that Ellie was found leaning forward in a way that looked like a Muslim prayer position, with her face pressed against the ground. But the picture the fisherman took of the crime scene showed her body lying flat. This made it very likely that someone had moved her after she was found, maybe to set up the crime. Paul thought that the cops might have been involved in a plot to hide something. After that, Paul met with the Tofo police officer who was in charge of Ellie's case. As they talked, the cop said something shocking. He or she thought Ellie had probably been killed somewhere else and then moved to the toilet block where her body was found. He said that the sand in her mouth did not match the sand at the scene. This meant that she had to breathe it in somewhere else, which is what DS Scruton had thought. Years of official reports from the Australian government said that the crime happened in the toilet area, but this one comment went against that. This meant that her body had been moved on purpose to that public place, possibly to make it look like she died by accident. The Australian cops were aware of this idea, but they never told the Warren family about it. Paul got angry and started yelling at the Australian Federal Police to explain what was going on. When his emails were not answered, he began copying government leaders on them to get them to respond. In March 2019, the Australian Federal Police finally answered, but they didn't answer his questions. Instead, they told him to stop sending mass emails because it could hurt the diplomatic process. Paul's worst fear came true. The Australian cops wanted the case to go away without a fuss. Then there was another big step forward in March 2021. A woman who had recently been to Tofo gave Paul information. People in the area were talking about a guy named Tony, who was said to be very important in the drug and crime trade. This person said that her kids had heard a talk in which Tony was accused of having something to do with Ellie's death. The woman said Tony was very dangerous and said he had a teardrop tattoo on his face and many other tattoos on his body. With this tip, Paul teamed up with Mad Mick, a German private investigator. It was planned to do a sting operation while not being seen. They paid a woman to hang out with Tony's friends so that he would admit. She recorded several talks over the course of a few weeks, but none of them directly mentioned Ellie. But as the surgery went on, the woman became more and more scared. Tony was nervous and hard to predict. The risk was too high at that point, so Paul and Mick called off the surgery before she could ask him again. After years of no results, Ellie's mother hired a lawyer in Mozambique in 2021, which made the police look into the case again. This led to yet another big step forward. The officials in Mozambique made a public announcement in May 2023 that Ellie had been killed. This was more than just a police report. They even named possible suspects but said there wasn't enough proof to make charges. Then, in December 2023, the Australian investigation into Ellie's death was over. The state coroner of Victoria agreed that murder was a possibility but wouldn't call it murder because there wasn't enough proof. Even though there was a lot of proof like the sand density analysis, inconsistent crime scene reports, eyewitness accounts, and the fact that the sand in Ellie's mouth was different from the sand at the crime scene, the coroner did not say that foul play had occurred. Paul's search for justice was hurt by this choice. Mozambique authorities were very clear that this was a murder case, but Australia wouldn't back them up. Sadly, this made the case weaker abroad, which made it even less likely that Mozambique would keep looking into or pursuing suspects. The request for mutual aid has still not been sent as of February 2025, even though it is a key part of working together with other countries. The truth is still being fought for by Paul Warren. Without a question, Ellie Warren would have been a successful marine biologist on the road at age 28 if she were still alive. Instead, she was sadly killed, and her government wants to forget about her and let the person or people who killed her go free. The case has not been solved 9 years after Ellie's death. That's it for today. If you found it thought-provoking, be sure to like, subscribe, and hit the bell to stay updated. Leave your thoughts in the comments, and as always, stay safe, stay smart, and keep seeking the truth.